Hello everyone, and welcome to Volume 2 of the Glitch in the Matrix stories. The unexplained circumstances from anonymous people online. If you're enjoying this series, please consider subscribing to this channel to keep up to date with future videos. Anyways, on to the stories. Inhumanly bright light within the backcountry. This happened last November, just over a year ago. Me and my friend, Joe, are pretty avid explorers. We've been in a lot of gnarly places in the backcountry. This trip we were planning was the same as any other. We were going to hike in on a private land to a secluded and very large, very high railway bridge. Camp for a night and see the area for other cool stuff to explore in the future. For better understanding of what occurs, you must know the geography of the area. The bridge is located over an old riverbed / small stream. No shit. And surrounding the stream is very high and steep mountainside hillsides, with dense native bush and trees. The bridge, however, is located in a relatively flat area that cradles the side of one of these big hills. It's important to recognize that this stream is not large by any definition. It's relatively short at around 3 kilometers, and is located in a deep gully and has nowhere near enough water flowing to support any fish life, let alone a boat / jet boat. It's shallow, fast flowing, and has huge boulders. Can't even get a truck up there, and if you did somehow, you wouldn't be driving out. Now we can actually get to the story. We hiked in around midday. It was slightly overcast, but with warm northeast wind. After walking across the maintenance line for the bridge, because fuck walking along the tracks, we found a cool camp location after a while of debating on whether to set up on the south side of the stream or the north. We settled on the north. In hindsight, this was one of the best choices I've ever made in my life. After a while of shenanigans and some beer, night fell. We then made our way to bed at around 9:30 to 10:30. At this point in time, the weather had changed. A dark, cold, gloomy southerly came in, but with absolutely no wind whatsoever. After a long time of not being able to sleep, I decided I'd step outside into the blanket of silence and net of darkness so I could take a quick piss. While pissing, I was enjoying my little bubble of darkness and dead silence, when out of nowhere the brightest light, even brighter than comprehension, burst into existence from within the riverbed before I could even finish my piss. When I say this was bright, I truly mean that. It completely lit up the entire south face of a 600-meter tall hillside, to the point I could see shrubs and foliage on the summit. At this point, my little fantasy of being alone was ruined in the worst way. I stood in shock for the 10 seconds it was illuminating the entire area. After this period had expired, I kept standing there, no longer pissing at this point, and waited. After 15 seconds of complete silence, the same ordeal happened again, but this time, whatever it was had traveled around 400 meters up the rugged and forested riverbed, only to illuminate even more for around the same amount of time. After it had turned off, I kept standing there in hopes it would illuminate again, and it sure did. But again, it had traveled at least another 300 to 400 meters further up than where it last was, in an even quicker time frame. As soon as it lit up, I darted back to the tent and grabbed my mate Joe, who I told to stand where I was and to look in the general direction. After a few seconds of suspense and denial, it would light up again. It did. Only this time it was, I shit you not, over 2 kilometers from where I'd first seen it, and this time it was completely illuminating an entire scree slope of a 1,000-meter tall ridgeline of the mountain range we were in. After this, it never lit up again, and we haven't been back since. I'm extremely glad we never camped on the south side. Otherwise, we would have been completely exposed and blinded by this, and God knows what else. After reading this, you may have an explanation of what caused this, and I'm telling you, you don't. This light source moved almost 3 kilometers in a matter of seconds, was completely stagnant, insanely bright. There was no sound of an engine, car, boat, or anything, just complete silence. The clouds were too low and dense for it to be a plane, a helicopter, or a meteorite. And it sure as hell wasn't the front spotlight of a train due to the geography of the area. This was not a man-made energy source, and whatever it was clearly searching for something. I met me from the future and can't stop thinking about it. This is a story that haunts me daily. This happened in 1992. I had just graduated high school and was working in a warehouse. I kinda enjoyed it and settled thinking I will probably retire here. Yup, I had zero ambition. I was a sad, lazy, cringe-inducing shitbag. A new guy started. It's a warehouse with high turnover, so nothing unusual about new guys. And everyone asked if we were related because we looked alike. He was probably late 30s, early 40s, and I was 18 at the time, and he was fatter. He seemed to carry himself like me, the way he walked and spoke. His second day, we worked together on a wrapping station, and the first thing he said to me was, "You still have that Penthouse magazine under your mattress?" I did. Weird but totally normal for teen boys, I suppose. He then said, "I know everything about you. You were worried about never getting a girlfriend." I was floored, but I again thought it was a usual teenage thing. I mean, I wasn't the best looking guy, so I guess it wasn't a stretch to guess. Probably the start of bullying and the end of my job is one thing I liked most about myself, is that I have no problems fighting anyone, anywhere, anytime. No matter how big or how many, I was always down. I never won, but could take a beating, and the person usually quit and never messed with me again. I asked him why he was saying all this shit, and he looked at me and his expression is seared into my mind, and left an image I see daily. He said, "I am you." He then went on to tell me everything about myself. I mean my deepest, darkest secrets that no one knows. Then he kept telling me more about myself. Then we went to lunch and we're outside smoking, and yup, same brand, Camel Wide regulars. Hard to find where I live, so I never seen anyone else smoking them. I asked him to be serious and how he knew all this shit. He said, "I already told you, Tomahawk." Tomahawk is a nickname only one person called me, and he was my dad's friend I barely saw. A crappy Jetta pulled into the parking lot and he said, "That's our girl. She is a demon who was horrible to us." I asked him why he is with her and he said, "She is the best we could do." When she got out, she was disgusting looking. I mean, trailer trash would be too kind, and she waddled her ass over to us. She said, "Let's go." Before he left, he stared right into my soul and said, "We deserve better. Please go to college and stop being lazy and make something out of yourself." Trailer Park Girl just kind of laughed like, "Yeah, right." He left with her and I never saw him again. I think I ran into a younger version of her at a friend's house years later, and he introduced me and said we should hook up. I said no. I went to college and stopped being a pathetic, lazy cringe fest. I accomplished everything I set out to do, as I always felt the need to not let him down. I know none of this makes sense. How can I explain something that I can barely understand myself? None of it makes sense whatsoever. Like, why would a future me get a job with me? He had to fill out a job application to have his references checked, right? Yes, I asked my manager, who was a POS, who just told me to mind my own damn business and focus on my job and try to be less of a screw-up. Has anyone had something like this happen to them? It's haunted me daily since. I am 48 and have not seen any time travel machines. Help me out here, maybe end this once and for all. Please, tell me your experiences. I have no explanation for what happened, but it gives me chills when I think about it. I know this sounds too crazy to be true, but it is. I wrote it as a recollection of events that happened to me over 15 years ago, in response to an Ask Reddit post. When I was 17 years old, I was visiting my dad and grandparents at their house. It was a nice home and with an upstairs basement. The wall paint was fresh, light colored, and it had a new feel to it, and it was comfortable and relaxing to be in. I've always been a safe/paranoid person, checking doors, checking windows, making sure everything is locked. So I also would look around the room from time to time to make sure nobody broke in or anything. At this time I was very religious and attended church with my family on Sundays. I had been reading the Bible from Genesis and decided to continue one night. I spent a few hours reading the Bible that night. I remember coming across verses that confused me, and I was getting generally upset because the first few books of the Bible especially are hard to swallow, especially for a teenage guy who was just trying to learn more about a loving God. Anyways, I was sitting in a large sofa chair and had my knees up and the Bible on my legs. There was a bright lamp that lit the living room. I could see the island countertop and open kitchen area up to my right. I could make out the fridge and all of the other stuff of the counter from where I was maybe 15 feet away. I would look up from the Bible every once in a while because of my natural paranoia. Every time I looked up, I was mainly just stretching and repositioning in the chair. I was very comfortable. I didn't feel that there was anything out of the ordinary going on. I didn't hear anything weird. My dad was asleep upstairs. My grandparents were asleep in their bedroom, which was next to the living room. So here is the traumatizing part, and I'm 100% not exaggerating this. As I write this, the hair is standing up on my body just thinking about it. I can't explain how terrifyingly real and frightening this was. I looked up from the Bible as usual, and as soon as I look into the kitchen, I see a man standing there. He has very long hair, a long beard, and is staring directly at me. He was not my family. I have never seen this person in my life. I literally was so frightened by this sight, much like a cat who was relaxed and suddenly startled by a loud sound. The hair all stood up on my body, and I bounced like a spring. I fell over the sofa chair and onto the floor. Instantly, it all happened so fast. I was back on my feet before I could fully register my response. It was pure startled and fear. Why is there a man standing in my kitchen staring at me? I was on my feet, ready to scream at him or scream. I don't really know how I would have reacted because when I got to my feet, there was no one in the kitchen. I stood there dumbfounded. I stared in disbelief. I was too afraid to move. At some point, I don't know how much time had passed, but I checked the kitchen, and I looked around the corner. I moved carefully and at a distance, so I could easily react or yell if I needed to. I was for sure that I had just seen a ghost or hallucinated. I'm a rational person. I have never hallucinated in my life. I checked the kitchen sliding door and it was locked. No one could have broken in and from the kitchen and escaped from the kitchen and the locked door behind them without making any noise. And the plastic blinds were all shut and none of them were moving. To this day, I have no explanation for this. All I know is that I'm either insane or there is some shit we still don't fully understand happening around us. I know what I saw, and I know that I've never had any experience like it ever, before or after. If it was a spirit from God or a ghost or Jesus or what, I don't know. But I never want to see something that isn't supposed to be in my house ever again. I'm not going to sleep well tonight after recalling this so vividly. I lost time, and it was more disorienting than I thought. This is not the most unique glitch in the Matrix story, but it is real and I cannot stop thinking about it. This happened last week. For context, I'm in college right now and live with my parents about 30 minutes away from the school. Because of current events, most of my classes are online, but I do have an in-person class that I go to once a week. It takes me 30 minutes to get to the school, and I know it does because I have driven this route to the school once a week for a few months now. Every Tuesday when I go to this class, I leave at 8 in the morning and get there at 8:30. Stay at the library until 9:30, and have my class from 9:45 until noon. Sometimes a little bit after, but I am used to that. On most other Tuesdays, after 12 I would have lunch at the school until around 12:20 to 12:30, leave afterward and get home a little after 1. On this day, however, I wanted to eat lunch at home, so I left immediately after class. I checked the time on my phone and it was 12:04 when I left the classroom. I remember on my way back to the car, I passed another clock that said it was 12:14. But I remember thinking it must have been wrong because a lot of the clocks around the school, a couple of minutes fast or slow. And that would have meant that it took me 10 minutes to walk about 30 yards. I should also mention that I have an old car that has no working clock or radio, which means I can't check the time when I'm driving. But I'm usually good at guessing time myself, so I've never had any problems. And this is also why this story is so weird. I got in my car and immediately left. I remembered thinking that I should get home no later than 12:40, and that I would probably get home earlier than that since I almost hit no red lights and the traffic wasn't bad. However, when I did get home and went inside, the clock in the kitchen said it was 1:05, which is the usual time that I would be home if I were to just stop first for lunch. My mom even asked me where I stopped for lunch, since I'd gotten home at my usual time. How did I manage to lose about 20 to 30 minutes of time without realizing it? My only possible explanation is that I was driving slower than I usually do and didn't realize it. But the fact that the clock at the school also said that it took me 10 minutes to walk from the classroom to my car would mean that I was somehow walking slower too without realizing it. That's odd. I should have died by now. This is one experience that gives me chills to remember. I was driving home from work. Rural back roads in the UK where the banks and hedges along the side of the narrow roads make it hard to see around the corners. And there's a lot of corners. But I knew the road so well as I drove it every day. Totally normal day. Probably driving a tad too fast. I was young, foolish, and in a rush to get home. And I looked down at the clock on the dash to see what time it was. As I look at the time, my own voice in my head speaks clear as a bell. That's odd. I should have died by now. I'm shocked by the thought. So odd, so loud, so clear. Weirdest thought I have ever had. I'm a little freaked out by the thought, and while distracted I noticeably slowed down. Maybe from 50-ish miles per hour to 30 miles per hour. I approach the next bend in the road. Suddenly as I turn I can see the road beyond the corner, and there's a massive tractor carrying hay bales on the front. And right in front of me, it's swerving into the bank on my side of the road. I slam on my brakes, I stop maybe a foot from the tractor, which has now impaled itself into the bank and is totally stationary. I have no doubt that had I not slowed down significantly just before the bend, had I still been driving a little too fast for the road, I would have smashed straight into it. Worse perhaps, I would have been caught between the tractor and the bank, which in an aged Vauxhall Nova would have been a no-brainer ending. I have no idea what put that thought into my head, or why it was so loud and so clear, but I'm pretty pleased I listened to it. I would like to thank everybody for listening to these stories. If you enjoyed, please consider liking the video and subscribing to be kept up to date with the latest stories. Thank you, and have a good day.